I'm ranking the albums of R.E.M. I'm wondering which ones I prefer by them.
Okay, a ridiculously great band and a massive influence. In doing this listen through to assess for this show, I've realised quite how much I've lifted from them. I've also remembered just how fun it is to cover R.E.M. I guess they weren't exactly at the top of my things to cover list because I tend to avoid the more dexterous bands because I don't have that dexterity, so I would just show the gulf in talent there. But I've recognised that even underneath that obvious way they're great is another way they're great, which is their harmonic strength. Now, the first few works I've got to lay a bit of a disclaimer for. I am as British as I sound. I'm actually more British than I sound. And R.E.M's college rock years, that's college the American definition, didn't really get over here. So for most of the 80s, I was completely unaware of R.E.M. and I've been playing catch up since. I think that means that I've missed the contextual importance of their work. You know, the 80s were quite drab for music in general, and maybe this sounded particularly exciting at the time. I can't tune into that exact channel. So if you're going to be upset by me not being that excited by their first few works, jump to this time code and I'll see you then. Allow me to represent their debut EP by holding up this CD because it does have it appended to the end of it, but whilst I'm here, Dead Letter Office is a compilation of outtakes and B-sides etc. from their first 3-4 albums. They're not really a B-sides band. I think this compilation doesn't have anything that important on it except for Chronic Town. So skip past the turgid covers and studio dick-arounds and you'll find their debut EP, which just has this locomotive energy to it. That's the definition of their introductory sound, this absolute momentum that must have really shone through American music in the early 80s. I guess it's comparable to stuff like Television, but more determined, less meandering. And it also compares to British post-punk, but has this Southern States character to it. This is a shimmering EP where every one of the tracks could be defined as the single on it. And honestly, Michael's famous early guardedness as a vocalist isn't quite that guarded yet. He's got a bit more confidence in these first 5 tracks. Very promising start. Let's see it go full length. I don't know if the title is a joke about his early singing style. Maybe it was taken from a review or something. If so, congratulations on being so self-aware on your first album. If not, it still has the same effect as the title. This one comes up against the strengths of Chronic Town because sometimes it does the same thing and does it well, but it's just no longer quite as fresh. And at other times it tries different things and they're still shy as a band, especially as a vocalist. I know that's heresy, I know this is a worshipped album by pretentious men of the right age, but I did tell you guys to skip ahead. To me, there's almost nothing essential on this one, but there is shaking through. A strength that will be obvious later in R.E.M's discography is how they nail a different vibe with each album. They'd not yet established that pattern, and thereby their second album is the same vibe. It's thereby hard to qualitatively distinguish these because they're doing the same thing just a bit more confidently, a bit more successfully, but a bit less freshly. I reckon this succeeds. This is Working Class Georgia as an album. Carrying on with the distinctive 80s band who famously never appear on their album covers. You can feel some more varied ambition on this one. They want to be a band who are gonna last and they're making the moves to become that. Here they set up the scaffolds for some new types of R.E.M. song. There's the snaking B minor bassline one, there's the gloomy adolescent E minor mooch, and more rootsy, earthy twang. They're kind of dressing the same scaffolds in different costumes a couple of times each, but I guess that's better than redressing their existing sound. The Michael's still taking one more step toward the mic, vibraphone. There's an aloofness to this album that obscures it more than their existing directly obscure work. This combination of better ideas, weirder ideas, and less focus makes it difficult to rank, so forgive where I put it. Forgive me for everything, ever. Then my direct fandom can begin. Bad news for fans of apostrophes. Here, R.E.M. discover overdrive. They're ready to rock out as a band. They clearly have an appreciation for rock music that's been bubbling under their existing works, but now they've put it right on the surface. Now, each track has a strong, individual, appreciable focus. The social conscience of R.E.M., which had made cameos thus far, is now a frontal feature. Still a bit of a mumblecore vibe, but here that contrasts with the music and provides a cool juxtaposition. Maybe what we've seen so far has been a glimpse into the humble little world of R.E.M. Here they are blasting through into the wider world. Then, after years of loving British post-punk, they finally decided to become it. Document's a good title, but maybe even more than that, you could call it Manifesto. This one's for the workers, the industry, the fire in the furnaces that powers our constructs of life. This continues their winning streak. It's R.E.M. ready to go global. It's not exactly mainstream, but their earlier stuff has such an intimate vibe to it. It was like guiltily reading someone's diary, their smudged diary. Water damaged? And yeah, now they're ready with the Manifesto. And then it's major label, and they're continuing their winning streak by getting weird with it. It's now bright colours of music. The cover is actually one of those tests where you look to colour and there's the word of a different colour and you meant to say the colour on the background. But here R.E.M. deliver on both fronts, being both accessible and really fucking odd. They nail this sarcastic hokiness, which is just like hokiness, except it's alright to enjoy it. By the time of Green, the R.E.M. were getting bored of the trappings of their own roles, so they started tossing the instruments around to each other and seeing how that would excite their sound. So it's funny to go major label and make such a move that can have quite an amateurish impact on your sound. With the extra instrumentation, it's developing toward what you can call Baroque pop, but it turned out to be just what they needed after the last couple. You know, you can't turn up the dial any further, so get silly. It's now that Michael has caught up with his colleagues as a musician. There's a lot of talent behind him, and he got this far by humming along to their demos. But now it feels like his ideas are equally offering direction, and he's just bloomed as a singer. Then this one is of course defined by its lead single. There's actually a couple of tracks here that should be equally or more definitive because they're equally or more awesome. And yet they're outnumbered by these weak and flowery tracks that just don't work. I think this one is generally respected as a classic album, and I think it's not because of its content. I'm sure at the time they put the effort in and they were focused on diversifying their sound, but to me it comes across as the hokiness without enough sarcasm, and multiple tracks that seem unfinished and bored of themselves. Call this a blip in a winning streak. Someone's not gonna like me putting it there. I'm only putting it there because of the quality of the music on it and how all the other ones are better. It's quite difficult to recognize the R.E.M. of a decade ago on here except for their musical excellence, although that's not exactly packaged properly for this album. I feel most of the quality of this one you can find better versions of on their previous or next albums. Because then we get to this elegant masterpiece. So this is the Baroque pop punch that isn't pulled. It's just beautiful, immersive, often despondent music. They're making the best of their familiar sound with guitars and their recently familiar sound with guitar-like instruments, but then there's the tracks that try completely new things to them and entirely succeed. This one is a singular beauty, and you already know that, but I'm telling you again. By reaching a new peak as a band, they've got new permission to get weird with it. This is garish glam, absolutely dominated by effects pedals. It's an overtly insular move to follow up such successful albums with something with nearly nothing in common with them. But it was R.E.M. reaching to a different extent of their interests, and it turns out their proficiency. It's very cynical, an album. It's wearing shades, so you can't really see what it really means, but it can't see you either, and it's made that choice. No eye contact is offered, and if you think you catch a glimpse, it'll probably still be a wink. The goal here is to be strange and awesome and trippy, and they succeed on all three counts. It's a unique approach to a rock sound, all artifice delivered at the other end of a tunnel. Not exactly shallow because of how intentional it all is. I think Paper Truth took a lot from this combination of loudness and layers and distortion. It's only the aloof density to the sound that dooms it to be just an occasional listen, but that's also what they were going for, so that's just another success. Then a band so road-weary, so stripped of colour, that they've decided to deliver on that vibe too. I think the circumstances of recording on the road after spending a few years as a studio band really define this one. But don't worry, it's not songs about the road, but it's still a perfect example of that vibe. In this series of negative adjectives for the 90s, they've been bereft, they've been bitter, and now they're impained. And yet it doesn't mean that it doesn't fucking rock. This is that last burst of adrenaline you get after an exhausting journey. The circumstances of its recording grant it and justify a new simplicity, and yet on top of that they've refined a new complexity. This ain't just meat and potatoes. There's this distance to it even further than their alien freak rock. It just feels like a satellite signal you might pick up at 3 a.m. This album allows itself to sprawl, having the most tracks so far and probably the highest average track duration, and yet as a listener that's no test at all, that's an extra perk. It's being invited on this long journey with them. Man down. Honestly, as a listen, R.E.M. have three main highlights, and they are Mike Mills' cute but smart pop sensibilities, Peter Buck's smart but tough guitar work, and then, although it took a while to emerge, Michael Stipe's melodic, poetic impressionism on top of it. I've always found the drumming somewhat perfunctory. I can't remember any particular highlights in Bill's performance, although what he brought as a songwriter and just as an element of the spirit of the band can't be overstated. If they lost any other member, I don't quite see how R.E.M. could have gone forward. This could have been a sensible move either way. They'd already done a good few tracks without live drums, and Bill could play multiple other instruments. And after time on the road, after time being loud, it was time to get small again and see what can be done in a room. The insomnia of their 90s work has stepped even further. We're probably past 4 a.m. now. It's a sedentary listen, and it results in these pretty and spacious and intimidated songs. Kind of ironic to say, considering this Walk Unafraid. Other than that, kind of intimidated. But I mean that as a good thing. They've let their inevitable wilt as a band become a strength in itself. They've made that part of the narrative. Age is showing, but maybe what you should do with age is admit it and embrace it. But it still drags in places. There's a few songs that they could have found something better than. Then the saturation is turned up the brightest to an almost blinding scale. Yeah, Reveal is a very shiny and pretty R.E.M. It was a good idea, it was the right idea, but only a few songs actually deliver on it. Maybe I'll find more to say. Too often the vibe dominates rather than complements the songs. Sticking with all these studio synths twice in a row takes us further from R.E.M. as a great thing. 2004 always feels pivotal in a Rank the Albums video for me, because it's around then that I actually had access to music and not just the shit on the radio. So it was narrowly before then that I could establish some individual tastes worth maintaining and seek out music. And then 2004 was when bands came back with their first album after I was actually into them. So the first real-time one as a fan. I think that's probably the least fortunate time to tune into R.E.M, but it also gives this one a sentimental significance to me. but one that doesn't really maintain when I put it on. With the closest to a personal set of lyrics that Michael has offered, and with the quite boring musicianship, this could easily be filed as a solo album. There's not really any audio proof that Peter Buck turned up. Nothing of what he's good at made its way onto this record. It's not exactly the material's fault, but the texture. But the material isn't that remarkable anyway. It's still a good few steps away from being worthless. Those first 3 tracks really glow. But it just sounds like studio musicians jobsworthing their way through some elevator music trudges. It's appropriate cover art because it's bright, out of focus, and boring. Then it's such an obviously fan service move to decide to finally rock out again. But there's no artifice to it because the fans they're really doing this for is themselves. They're rocking out like a band that actually has a drummer again, but there's no sense of going backwards. They're accelerating in the new direction. This is the new locomotion, the new drive. I think the public reaction to this one may have been that it's like a respectable return to form, but only that, and still with the air quotes. To me, it's absolutely in the sweet spot of my taste, and it just feels like a constant thrill. Those final 3 tracks are 3 that could easily go down as classics if we weren't coming up to the end here and people are not exactly receptive to classics at this point. This rocks, it fucking rocks, and it fucks, but there's more than the surface to it too. It's my campaign for this to be recognised as one of R.E.M's very best, but there's a few to compete with up there. So that was a course correction after their post-bill floundering, and R.E.M. needed to figure out where to go next. They'd remembered how to impress in one more way that was fresh to them, so did they have any more in them? And I think the 3 of them maturely and very respectably realised that they kind of didn't, but they could squeeze out one more victory lap album. This is self-congratulation. It's like a final episode of TV that's just so satisfying as a fan because it nods to all the right things. It might not have all that much to offer on its own merits, but at this point of the discography, it doesn't need to. So their decision was to hold up some mirrors to all the best of what R.E.M. do really well. It makes this album a kind of photocopy of R.E.M. as a band, so not exactly any depth to it, but it's in really good full resolution and on glossy paper. The kind of luxury photocopy that you'd never want to crease and you might put in a frame. The closest thing to a new idea is kind of a development on Accelerate's Rockin' the Fuck Out that just allows them to get a bit silly. You know, they've reached the finish line, this is just their celebration. It's just this impish celebratory vibe for everyone who's come along for the ride. We love each other, we've survived 30 years, let's party. It celebrates their freedom. You win the race and you can drink the cup. They've recognized this can only ever be defined as the final R.E.M. album, so they've turned that into its own artistic highlight. This can play during the end credits and leave you with a massive stupid smile. Any remnants? Well, there's one release that could have made me add a plus to the video title, Hindu Love Gods. It's shit. There aren't many worthy B-sides. These re-releases shine a flashlight through their attic, and occasionally something really shimmers, but it's otherwise a stash of junk, plus focusing on live energy. They're an albums band, and that's why their albums are so amazing. If they're also a live band, it's for people who go outside and was just occasional bursts of the torture of world touring. I didn't catch it. Their later career is overstocked with backup musicians. Rank the Lives can be someone else's series. This is a band for whom I've particularly noticed online commenters saying they love the music but completely disagree with their politics. It's that specific extreme of dumbness that right-wing Americans have, where those who are interested in making things better are verboten. I think to appreciate beauty but to support harm kind of demonstrates that you're missing out on some of the beauty. You're lost fuckwits. There's not really a problem when people with shitty politics enjoy good music. It's the conservatism they've been duped into that's the problem. But that'll die out and beautiful music will last. It's kind of filmmaker music. The details, as well as what's not detailed, are so well detailed. Peter and Mike have continued in music as inevitably as their talents and interests suggest they would have. Just being a shadowy guitar dude and a lovely melody geek, both allergic to fame, doing their jobs perfectly in indie bands, sometimes together. Bill's actually slightly re-emerged in music too. Michael took his beard hiatus and is slowly nudging his way toward a solo career with a few whispery tracks that start uppish and go all immersive. It does sound good. All throughout these men is a career devotion to music rather than success, which is why they're such a musical success.